quite an important day in South Africa. Of course, we've got the release of the medium-term budget speech later on in the day, and many say that Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan has a bit of a balancing act regarding forecasts and, of course, policy.
You talk about being handed a hospital pass. You know, it's almost 13 years that Trevor Manuel's subsided as finance minister over the economy. He had I wouldn't say an easy time of it, because there were some amazing policies he managed to implement in the time. But Pravin Gordhan and Jacob Zuma too, let's not forget, took over at quite a tumultuous time in the broader global economic context. I guess maybe there'll be a little bit of hand-wringing, because the ANC, the ruling party, are an amazing organization where you can find communists rubbing shoulders with champions of business. So it's a bit of a strange mix, and you know, it's well documented that in getting to where he's got to, Jacob Zuma has relied on some of the pressure from the leftist side, who've been calling on Pravin Gordhan to perhaps be a little bit more forthcoming. You know, if you go back and you have a look at what has been done on the social welfare side, we've done quite a lot. But, you know, in my opinion, we live in a place where there's a big disparity between rich and poor. So, you know, I think perhaps we need to look a little bit closer at maybe giving tax credits for small businesses, doing interesting stuff which can create jobs, and not waiting for business to create jobs. Look for that entrepreneurial spirit that exists in many developing economies around the world.
Now, you mentioned getting tax for small businesses out there, but as an investor, what else are you going to be looking for that's going to be quite key?
Look, I think a lot of it's got to do with being socially responsible, but also being fiscally prudent, you know, at the same time. I think, you know, Pravin Gordhan is not new to this kind of sphere, because he was, you know, he headed up SARS for a long time. So he knows very well that there's going to be quite a big shortfall. And he said last week that we should expect around 2% decline in growth. I don't know if you can use those two words in the same sentence. So he's kind of set us up for something, for pretty much what we should expect. I saw yesterday the opposition parties said, okay, pin your colours to the flag. Tell us whose side you're on. You know, whether you're going to follow the middle of the road type policy. I think most investors probably would prefer if there was little to no change. But there probably will be some taxation issues, probably. Again, everyone always talks about sin taxes, maybe a little bit more pressing. And that's typically why we don't like those companies, simply because those concerns exist globally. So I think more of the same, really. I think that's what investors would like to see, with a few tweakings here and there at the edges expected.
Last week, we saw the rand weaken to about 7.51, and that's after speculation had grown about that news that we could see the rand being frozen at a certain level. Do you think that something could emerge, some news could emerge today on that?
I don't think so, I must be honest. You know, I mean, the rand is what it is. You know, we've got very liquid bond and equity markets here that control the flows of the rand, much to the detriment of manufacturing and mining. But be that as it may, there are many countries around the world who do peg their currency, and do you say to what? To the dollar? Because the consensus out there is that the flows are moving away from the dollar.
Today we've weakened quite significantly. We're currently at 7.58.
Yeah, but this is early morning trade so far. But you know, I think what I'm trying to say is, what do you choose? You know, do you choose a basket? Because even the Chinese have moved away from a complete dollar peg to a basket of currencies. You know, this is not really my domain, but I wouldn't think that pegging your currency is entirely the right thing to do, because if you
we don't have the reserves for us anyway, Sasha. We've got 30 billion rand.
Exactly, exactly. And I would think at these levels, perhaps the Reserve Bank has been using that as a accumulation rather than, you know, trying to talk the rand down.
Okay, well, just looking at the fact that the dollar did gain some ground yesterday, and we saw commodity prices coming off slightly, and also had that I mentioned earlier, the CBOE volatility index jumping to 24, a far cry from where it was at 80 during the crash, of course. But just looking at the current environment right now, earnings coming out of the US, a mixed bag, but yet it seems that there's still quite a lot of risks in the horizon, and it seems that some investors are just feeling a bit wary about the levels.
I think it's because people draw lines in the sand and they say, right, you know, we're up XYZ from the March lows. But I did an interesting historical analysis of where, say, for instance, the Nasdaq was. You know, if you bought at the lows in 1996, and again you added to your lows in March, the difference was 10%. So we're talking over a 15-year period. So again, it depends, you know, what kind of investor you are, where you make your mark. And I think the problem with the human element in the market is we tend to take back data and think that that's what's going to happen going forward. I mean, let's be honest, companies have become a lot more efficient because they use this time. Cost cut, headcount loss. Now, you know, you might view that negatively in the short term, but I think in the long term, far more efficient companies. I think the bigger question to ask here is, when is the consumer actually going to come back?
When is it going to come back, Sasha?
I suspect in the first half of next year in the developed world.
Well, looking at the South African consumer, we know that the consumer is still very much under pressure. How do we compare to the likes of the US? Because when we see the kind of earnings that are coming through from the US and comparing it to here in South Africa, are you concerned that we're still lagging?
You must remember, we actually raised rates in June 2008. So, you know, whilst the rest of the world was in an aggressive cutting program in order to, because they could see real problems, our Reserve Bank was a little bit slow. So I think we're lagging by quite some margin.
When you see the likes of the results that came through from famous brands, do you feel hopeful that things are going to start getting better in South Africa?
Yeah, I think what we have in South Africa is different dynamics. You've got lots of new entrants to the middle class who, you know, who join the ranks of those fast food eating chains and visit these types of chains for the first time. So I think you've got different dynamic at play here. You've got the bottom end of the spectrum, which is emerging quite quickly in terms of the middle class, and then you've got the top end who's still stressed. You know, you still have stressed buyers in the property market. People have been deleveraging for the better part of this year, so you haven't quite seen the full knock-on effect of all these interest rate cuts that we've seen so far, and that's why you're probably still going to see a few poor reads.